Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs as the scarred rancher delivered his shocking ultimatum. I need a wife before winter comes, and you'll die in that cottage alone. With the first snowflakes already falling and her life in ruins, she recognized the terrifying truth in his words. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The first snowflakes of the season drifted lazily from the steel-gray sky as Eliza Bennett stood at the bus stop in the small town of Broken Ridge, Montana. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders, the garment woefully inadequate against the biting November wind. 3 months ago, she had been in her comfortable Manhattan apartment with a closet full of designer clothes and a promising career in finance. Now she stood on the dusty main street of a town she'd never heard of until 2 weeks ago, with nothing but a single suitcase and the crushing weight of her shattered life. The financial firm where she'd worked for 6 years had collapsed in scandal. Her boss, who had also been her fiancé, was now in federal custody, charged with fraud and embezzlement. Eliza hadn't been implicated in the crimes, but her reputation was in tatters. Her bank accounts had been frozen pending investigation. Friends she'd thought would stand by her suddenly couldn't return her calls. The apartment she could no longer afford. Her entire life had been reduced to ashes in the span of a single week. It was her great-aunt Marjorie's letter that had brought her to Broken Ridge. The old woman had passed away the previous month, leaving Eliza a small parcel of land and a dilapidated cottage on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was the only option Eliza had left. She had spent her last dollars on the bus ticket, arriving with just enough cash for a few days' worth of groceries. "You must be Marjorie's niece," a voice called from behind her. Eliza turned to find a woman in her 60s approaching, her weather-beaten face kind beneath a practical beige hat. "Great niece, actually. I'm Eliza Bennett." "Martha Wilson," the woman said, extending her hand. "I run the general store. Marjorie and I were friends for 40 years. She spoke of you often." "That's strange," Eliza replied, accepting the handshake. "We barely knew each other. I only met her twice at family reunions when I was young." Martha's eyes twinkled. Marjorie kept tabs on all her relatives, especially the ones who left Montana. She was proud of your success in New York. A lump formed in Eliza's throat. That success didn't last. "I heard something about that," Martha said gently. "News travels, even to Broken Ridge. But people here don't judge too harshly. Everyone deserves a second chance." Eliza doubted that sentiment applied to the unemployed, disgraced former fiancé of a man who had stolen millions from investors, but she managed a thin smile anyway. "I need to get to Aunt Marjorie's place," she said, changing the subject. "Can you point me in the right direction?" Martha's expression shifted, concern clouding her features. "It's about 3 miles out of town. The cottage hasn't been lived in for years, and it's in pretty rough shape. I was planning to drive you out there myself, but my truck's in the shop today." "I can walk," Eliza said, though the thought of trudging 3 miles through the cold with her suitcase was daunting. "That won't be necessary," Martha replied, looking past Eliza down the street. "Here comes Thorne Blackwell now. He owns the ranch adjacent to your aunt's property. He can give you a ride." Before Eliza could protest, Martha was waving at an approaching pickup truck. It slowed and pulled to the curb beside them. The driver's door opened, and Eliza found herself face to face with the most intimidating man she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and solid, with the muscular build of someone who worked physically demanding jobs from sunrise to sunset. His face was striking, handsome in a rough-hewn way, with a strong jaw, straight nose, and eyes the color of a winter storm. A black cowboy hat cast shadows across his features but couldn't hide the jagged scar that ran from his right temple down to his jawline. Another set of scars marked his left forearm, visible where he had rolled up the sleeve of his flannel shirt. Martha, he acknowledged, his voice deep and gravelly. Thorne, this is Eliza Bennett, Marjorie's great-niece from New York. She's come to stay at the old Harper place. Could you give her a ride out there? The man's piercing eyes assessed Eliza with unsettling intensity. Harper Place is barely standing. Roof's likely to cave in with the first heavy snow. I don't have many other options, Eliza replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Something flickered across his face. Not quite sympathy, but a recognition of her situation. Get in, he said finally, nodding toward the passenger side of the truck. Martha squeezed Eliza's hand. Come by the store tomorrow. I'll help you get settled with supplies. Eliza thanked her, then reluctantly approached the truck. Thorne Blackwell took her suitcase without asking and tossed it in the truck bed before opening the passenger door. She climbed in, acutely aware of how out of place she looked in her city clothes. The inside of the truck was surprisingly clean, though well-worn. As Thorne slid into the driver's seat beside her, the cab seemed to shrink around his imposing presence. He started the engine without a word and pulled away from the curb. They drove in silence for several minutes, leaving the small town behind and heading into the vast, rolling landscape of the Montana countryside. Snow was falling more steadily now, the flakes swirling in front of the headlights. Thank you for the ride, Eliza said finally, the silence becoming unbearable. Thorne grunted in response, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Have you lived here long? She tried again. All my life, he replied, offering nothing more. Another mile passed in awkward silence before Thorne spoke again. You picked a bad time to move to Montana. Winter hits hard here, different from New York. I didn't exactly have a choice, Eliza said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her voice. His eyes slid to her briefly before returning to the road. Martha mentioned something about trouble, said you lost everything. Eliza stiffened. I'd rather not discuss it. Fair enough, he conceded. But that doesn't change the fact that you're about to live in a collapsing house with no heat, no proper insulation, and probably no running water, with winter bearing down on us. The blunt assessment sent a chill through Eliza that had nothing to do with the temperature. She had known the cottage might need work, but she hadn't realized it was practically uninhabitable. I'll figure something out, she said, more to herself than to him. Thorne made a sound that might have been a scoff. City people always think determination is enough to solve everything. Before Eliza could formulate a retort, the truck turned onto a narrow dirt road, barely more than a pair of tire tracks through the grass. A few hundred yards ahead stood what must have been Aunt Marjorie's cottage, a small, sad-looking structure with peeling paint and missing shingles. Even from a distance, Eliza could see that one of the windows was broken, covered with what looked like plastic sheeting. Thorne stopped the truck and turned to look at her directly. In the fading light, his scarred face seemed even more severe. You can't stay here, he said flatly. Eliza felt panic rising in her throat. I don't have anywhere else to go. I need a wife before winter comes, he said abruptly. She blinked at him, certain she had misheard. Excuse me? You heard me. His expression remained deadly serious. My ranch is 5 times the size it was when my father ran it. I've expanded the operation, invested in better stock. But I can't manage it all alone anymore, and hired hands aren't reliable enough. I need someone permanent. Eliza stared at him, speechless. I'm offering you a solution, he continued. Marry me. You'll have a warm place to live, food on the table, and a share in a profitable ranch. In return, you help run the household and the administrative side of the business. That's insane, Eliza sputtered. I don't even know you. You don't know how to survive a Montana winter in a broken-down shack either, he countered. I'm not talking about love, Ms. Bennett. I'm talking about practicality, a business arrangement between 2 adults with complementary needs. Why me? You could ask any single woman in town. A muscle twitched in his jaw. I have. None of them are willing to look at this face across the breakfast table every morning. His finger traced the scar on his cheek without seeming to realize it. And none of them have your background in finance. Eliza frowned. How do you know about my background? Small town, he replied with a shrug. Martha makes it her business to know everything about everyone. She mentioned you worked for some big financial firm. That's exactly what I need, someone who understands money, investments, business planning. Snow was accumulating on the windshield, the cottage before them growing dimmer as dusk settled over the landscape. The heating in the truck was struggling against the dropping temperature, and Eliza could already imagine how cold that cottage would be tonight. This is crazy, she whispered. It's practical, Thorne corrected. You need shelter and security. I need a business partner and a wife. We're both adults who've had our share of disappointments. Neither of us is looking for grand romance. His accurate assessment of her situation made Eliza uncomfortable. She had come to Montana to escape, to hide from her humiliation and rebuild some semblance of a life. The last thing she had expected was a marriage proposal from a scarred rancher within an hour of her arrival. I need time to think, she said finally. Thorne nodded once. You can stay at my ranch tonight in the guest room. No strings attached. Think it over while you're somewhere warm and safe. Tomorrow you can give me your answer. As if to emphasize the urgency of his offer, a gust of wind rocked the truck, sending a swirl of snowflakes against the window. In the distance, the cottage looked even more forlorn, a dark silhouette against the gathering storm. Okay, Eliza said quietly. I'll think about it. Thorne put the truck in reverse without another word, turning them back toward the main road. As they drove away from Aunt Marjorie's property, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into a decision that would change the course of her life forever, for better or for worse. Night had fully descended by the time they reached the Blackwell Ranch. Through the swirling snow, Eliza could make out the silhouette of a sprawling two-story farmhouse, light glowing warmly from several windows. As they drew closer, she saw outbuildings scattered across the property, a large barn, what appeared to be stables, and several other structures whose purposes she couldn't identify in the darkness. Unlike her aunt's neglected cottage, everything here spoke of careful maintenance and prosperity. The driveway was well graveled, the fence posts stood straight and sturdy, and even through the snowfall, Eliza could tell the property was meticulously kept. Thorne pulled the truck to a stop near the front porch and cut the engine. The sudden silence was heavy between them. Wait here, he said, then stepped out into the snow before she could respond. Eliza watched through the windshield as he strode to the porch and spoke briefly with someone at the door, a middle-aged woman who nodded and disappeared back inside. Then he returned to the truck and opened her door. Mrs. Caldwell is my housekeeper, he explained as he retrieved Eliza's suitcase from the truck bed. She comes in days, leaves before dark. She's made up the guest room for you. That's very thoughtful, Eliza said, surprised by the consideration. Thorne merely grunted in response and led the way to the house, his broad shoulders cutting a path through the thickening snow. The interior of the farmhouse was as well maintained as the exterior, though it lacked a woman's touch. The furnishings were solid and practical, heavy wooden tables, comfortable but plain sofas, and minimal decoration. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, filling the main room with welcome warmth. Mrs. Caldwell's left dinner warming in the oven, Thorne said, setting Eliza's suitcase at the foot of the stairs. Guest room is upstairs, first door on the right, bathrooms across the hall. Thank you, Eliza said, unsure what else to add. The surreality of her situation was beginning to sink in. 24 hours ago, she had been on a bus, heading to a new beginning. Now she was standing in a stranger's home, considering his proposal of marriage. "I need to check on the livestock," Thorne said, already moving toward the door. "The storm's coming in faster than expected. Make yourself at home. We'll talk more when I return." Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Eliza stood alone in the entryway, the crackling fire and ticking of a grandfather clock the only sounds in the otherwise silent house. She took her suitcase upstairs, finding the guest room exactly where Thorne had indicated. It was simple but comfortable, a queen-sized bed with a handmade quilt, a solid oak dresser, and a rocking chair by the window. The window itself looked out over the ranch, though now all she could see was darkness and swirling snow. After freshening up in the bathroom, which, she noted with relief, had perfectly functioning modern plumbing, Eliza made her way back downstairs. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since a hasty breakfast on the bus that morning. The kitchen was spacious and unexpectedly modern. High-end appliances suggested that whoever had designed this space took cooking seriously. She found the promised dinner in the oven, a casserole of some kind, still warm. A quick investigation of the refrigerator revealed a salad covered with plastic wrap and a note. For Ms. Bennett. Mrs. C. Eliza served herself and sat at the large kitchen table, designed to seat at least 8 people. As she ate the surprisingly delicious meal, she tried to organize her thoughts about Thorne Blackwell's shocking proposal. On one hand, it was completely insane. She had just met the man. He was intimidating, gruff, and clearly harboring his own set of issues. Marriage was a serious commitment, even if framed as a business arrangement. On the other hand, what were her alternatives? The cottage was clearly uninhabitable, especially with winter approaching. Her funds were nearly depleted. The investigation into her ex-fiancé's firm meant her professional reputation was toxic. She had no job prospects, no connections in Montana, and nowhere else to go. And there was something about Thorne that intrigued her. Beneath the gruff exterior and intimidating presence, she sensed a man of integrity. He hadn't sugar-coated his offer or pretended it was anything other than what it was, a practical solution to both their problems. She was still contemplating her limited options when the front door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the sound of stomping boots. Thorne appeared in the kitchen doorway, snow melting in his dark hair and on the shoulders of his jacket. His cheeks were reddened from the cold, making the scar on his face stand out even more starkly. "Storm's picking up," he said, removing his jacket and hanging it on a hook by the door. "We got 6 inches already, with more coming." "Is that unusual for this time of year?" Eliza asked. "Early, but not unheard of." He moved to the sink, washing his hands with the practiced motions of someone who had done so thousands of times. "The weather forecasters have been predicting a hard winter. This is just the beginning." The implication hung in the air between them. Her aunt's cottage wouldn't survive such a winter, and neither might she. Thorne served himself a plate of food and sat across from her at the table. They ate in silence for several minutes before he spoke again. "You have questions?" he stated rather than asked. Eliza set down her fork. "About 100 of them." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Start with the most important." "Why marriage?" she asked. "Why not just hire me as a business manager or assistant?" Thorne took a sip of water before answering. "2 reasons. First, practical. Marriage gives you legal rights to the property if something happens to me. It's protection for both of us. And the second reason," he met her gaze directly, "appearances. A single woman living in my house, working for me. People would talk. This is a small town with traditional values. Marriage silences gossip and gives you a respected position in the community." "That's surprisingly thoughtful," Eliza admitted. "I'm not as unaware of social nuances as I might seem, Ms. Bennett." "Please call me Eliza. If we're discussing marriage, we should at least be on a first-name basis. He nodded once. Eliza, then. And what would your expectations be? Beyond the business partnership? She asked, feeling heat rise in her cheeks despite her attempt at a professional tone. Thorne's expression remained impassive. We would share the house as husband and wife. Separate bedrooms, at least initially. I don't expect physical intimacy as part of our arrangement, though I won't pretend I haven't considered the possibility that our relationship might evolve over time. His blunt honesty was both disconcerting and refreshing. After years in New York, where people couched everything in layers of subtext and polite falsehoods, Thorne's straightforwardness was almost jarring. And what happens if one of us meets someone else? Someone we might actually love? The question felt necessary, though speaking it aloud made the arrangement seem even more bizarre. We would address that if it happens, he replied. I'm not looking for love, Eliza. I tried that once. It didn't end well. His hand unconsciously touched the scar on his face, then dropped back to the table. I'm looking for partnership, stability, and mutual benefit. The scar, she said before she could stop herself. Is that what you meant when you said none of the local women would look at your face across the breakfast table? A shadow passed over his features. People fear what they don't understand, and they don't understand this. He gestured to his face. Or the man who bears it. What happened? She asked gently. That's a story for another time, he said, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. If you agree to my proposal. Eliza looked around the warm, solid kitchen, thinking of the cold, dilapidated cottage that was her only alternative. She thought of her depleted bank account, her ruined career, and the long, harsh Montana winter that was already announcing its arrival outside the windows. If I agree, she said slowly, I would want some conditions of my own. Thorne leaned back in his chair, regarding her with interest. I'm listening. First, I want a real role in the business, not just bookkeeping, but input on decisions, investments, future planning. He nodded. That's what I need from you.
Second, if either of us wants to end the arrangement, we do so civilly, with fair division of assets accumulated during our partnership. Reasonable, he agreed. Anything else? Eliza took a deep breath. I want honesty between us, complete honesty, no matter how uncomfortable. If we're going to build something together, even if it's just a business relationship, it has to be built on truth. Thorne studied her face for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable. Then he extended his hand across the table. Deal, he said simply. Eliza hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip firm but not crushing. A strange sensation passed through her at the contact, not quite a spark but a recognition, a sense that, bizarre as this situation was, she might have found exactly where she needed to be. I must be crazy, she murmured. No, Thorne replied, still holding her hand. Just practical, like me. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in white as the first night of their unusual agreement settled around them. Eliza woke to the sound of movement downstairs, the clink of dishes, the opening and closing of doors, footsteps on hardwood floors. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The bus ride to Montana, Aunt Marjorie's decrepit cottage, and Thorne Blackwell's startling proposal. She had agreed to marry him, a practical arrangement between strangers. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, she felt a strange calm. After months of chaos and uncertainty, she finally had a plan. Sunlight streamed through the window, revealing a pristine landscape of white. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind at least a foot of snow that glittered in the morning light.
Beyond the blanket of white, Eliza could now see the full expanse of the Blackwell Ranch, rolling pastures, clusters of pine trees, and mountains rising in the distance. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Yes?" she called. The door opened slightly and a woman's face appeared. The housekeeper Thorne had mentioned, Mrs. Caldwell. She was in her 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett. Mr. Blackwell asked me to let you know breakfast will be ready in 15 minutes. He has a full day planned to show you the operation." "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell. I'll be right down." The older woman hesitated. "Mr. Blackwell mentioned your arrangement. I hope you don't mind my knowing." Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. "No, that's fine. I suppose everyone will know soon enough." Mrs. Caldwell's expression softened. "If it helps, I think you're exactly what this place needs. Mr. Blackwell is a good man who's had more than his share of hardship, and this ranch is special. It deserves someone who can appreciate it." Before Eliza could respond, the housekeeper retreated, closing the door behind her. 15 minutes later, Eliza descended the stairs dressed in the warmest clothes she had packed. Jeans, a sweater, and ankle boots that she already knew would be inadequate for the Montana snow. She found Thorne in the kitchen, drinking coffee and studying papers spread across the table. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, suddenly awkward in his presence. The enormity of their agreement seemed to fill the space between them. Mrs. Caldwell bustled in from the pantry. Sit," she urged, placing a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast in front of Eliza. "You'll need your strength today. First day at Blackwell Ranch is always a busy one." Thorne gathered his papers as Eliza began to eat. "I thought we'd start with a tour of the operation," he said. "You should understand what you're getting into before we make this official." "That seems reasonable," Eliza agreed, grateful for his practicality. "I've left some of my late wife's winter clothes in your room," Mrs. Caldwell added. "About your size, I'd say. You'll need proper gear for ranch life." Eliza froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. "Late wife? I didn't realize you were married before." Thorne's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Catherine died 4 years ago. We don't need to discuss it now." The abrupt response left Eliza speechless. Mrs. Caldwell gave her a sympathetic look and quietly excused herself from the kitchen. "I'm sorry," Eliza said when they were alone. "I didn't mean to pry." "Yes, you did," Thorne replied, his voice not unkind despite the blunt words. "And that's fine. You have a right to know about my past if we're going to be partners, but some topics take time." She nodded, understanding. They both had painful histories they weren't ready to share. After breakfast, Eliza changed into the clothes Mrs. Caldwell had left. Warm flannel-lined jeans, a thick sweater, heavy socks, and insulated boots that fit surprisingly well. There was also a down jacket, gloves, and a knitted hat. The items carried a faint scent of lavender and something else, perhaps the lingering presence of the woman who had worn them before. Thorne was waiting by the front door when she came downstairs again. If seeing her in his late wife's clothes affected him, he didn't show it. "Ready?" he asked, handing her a pair of work gloves. The cold hit Eliza like a physical blow when they stepped outside, but the proper clothing made it bearable. She followed Thorne across the yard toward the largest barn, her boots crunching through fresh snow. "Blackwell Ranch runs 500 head of cattle," he explained as they walked. "Premium stock, grass-fed. We also have 30 quarter horses, some for work, some we breed and train for sale. The operation grosses about $2 million annually, with net profits around $400,000 in good years." Eliza's financial mind immediately began calculating. "That's impressive for a ranch this size. We diversified. Traditional ranching is too volatile these days. We've added specialty meat production, horse training programs, and limited tourism offerings in the summer months." They reached the barn, and Thorne pulled open the heavy door. Warm air and the smell of hay and animals greeted them. Inside, two men were working. One, an older man with a weathered face and silver hair, was inspecting a horse's hoof. The other, younger with ruddy cheeks, was stacking bales of hay. "Meet my foreman, Jack Monroe," Thorne said, nodding toward the older man. "Been with the ranch longer than I have. And that's Ethan Hayes, our newest hand." Jack set down the horse's hoof and approached, studying Eliza with undisguised curiosity. "So you're the city girl who's going to be the new Mrs. Blackwell." "Word travels fast," Eliza said, extending her hand. "Eliza Bennett." Jack's handshake was firm. "Small town, Miss Bennett. No secrets here." He looked at Thorne. "She know what she's getting into?" "That's why we're here," Thorne replied. "Full transparency." For the next 3 hours, Eliza received a crash course in ranch operations. They toured the cattle pastures by truck, visited the horse training facilities, and inspected the small meat processing plant Thorne had built 2 years earlier. Everywhere they went, Thorne introduced her to ranch hands and explained operations with meticulous detail. He spoke about the business with obvious pride, answering her questions patiently. By midday, Eliza's head was spinning with new information, but she was also impressed. The Blackwell Ranch was a sophisticated operation with multiple revenue streams and careful financial planning. Thorne might present himself as a simple rancher, but he clearly had a sharp business mind. "You've built something remarkable here," she said as they drove back toward the main house for lunch. Thorne's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "My father ran this place into the ground. When I took over, we were 3 months from foreclosure. Everything you see, I built from scratch." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and Eliza found herself admiring his determination. She understood what it meant to rebuild from ruins. "This afternoon we'll go into town," Thorne continued. "You'll need more clothes and supplies, and we should speak to Reverend Hayes about the ceremony." "Ceremony?" Eliza's stomach tightened. "You mean the wedding? Unless you've changed your mind." She looked out at the vast, snow-covered landscape. "No, I haven't changed my mind. It's just happening very quickly." "Winter won't wait," he replied simply. In town, their appearance together caused a stir that was both subtle and unmistakable. People greeted Thorne with respect, but eyed Eliza with undisguised curiosity. At the general store, Martha Wilson beamed at them. "I see you two have come to an arrangement," she said, her eyes twinkling. "News travels fast," Eliza murmured. "Mrs. Caldwell called her cousin, who told her daughter, who mentioned it to her husband, who works with Jack's nephew." Martha explained cheerfully. "You'll get used to it." As Martha helped Eliza select appropriate winter clothing, she lowered her voice. "Thorne's had a hard road. After what happened with Catherine, and then the accident, well, many thought he'd never open his home to anyone again." "What accident?" Eliza asked, her curiosity piqued. Martha's expression turned somber. "Not my story to tell, dear. But that scar on his face, it's nothing compared to the ones you can't see." Before Eliza could press further, Thorne approached, carrying several boxes of supplies. "Found everything you need?" he asked. "I think so," Eliza replied, still processing Martha's cryptic comment. Their next stop was the small white church at the end of Main Street. Reverend Hayes, father of Ethan, the young ranch hand they'd met earlier, greeted them warmly in his office. "Martha called ahead," he explained, smiling. "Said you might be coming to discuss a wedding." Thorne nodded. "We'd like to keep it simple, just the legal requirements." "Of course." The Reverend turned to Eliza. "And you're comfortable with this arrangement, Miss Bennett?" "Yes," she replied, surprised by the conviction in her voice. "It's unconventional, but it makes sense for both of us." "Very well. How does Saturday sound? That gives us 3 days." Eliza blinked. This Saturday? That's very soon. The sooner we make this official, the sooner you can fully integrate into the business, Thorne said, practical as always. As they left the church, a sleek black SUV pulled up beside them. The window rolled down, revealing a handsome man in his 40s with cold eyes and an expensive haircut. "Blackwell," he greeted, his gaze sliding to Eliza with calculating interest. "Heard you're getting married. Congratulations." Thorne's posture stiffened. "Reed, what brings you to town?" "Business opportunities, always looking to expand." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps your lovely fiancée would be interested in discussing investment possibilities. I understand she has quite the financial background." "My fiancée will be fully occupied with Blackwell Ranch," Thorne replied, his voice carrying an edge Eliza hadn't heard before. He placed a protective hand on her lower back, gently guiding her toward their truck. "James Reed," Thorne explained once they were driving back to the ranch, "owns the largest development company in the county. Been trying to buy up ranch land for resort properties." "Including yours?" Eliza guessed. "He's made offers, increasingly aggressive ones." Thorne's hands were tight on the wheel again. He's not used to hearing no. As they crested the hill overlooking Blackwell Ranch, Eliza was struck again by the beauty of the property. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the snow, the buildings solid and welcoming against the vast landscape. In 3 days, this would be her home. Thorne Blackwell would be her husband. The thought should have terrified her, but as she watched his profile against the setting sun, she felt only a strange sense of rightness. Whatever had brought her to this moment, scandal, disgrace, financial ruin, perhaps it had been leading her exactly where she needed to be. Saturday arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. Eliza stood in her bedroom, no longer the guest room but now officially hers, staring at her reflection in the antique dresser mirror. The dress she wore was borrowed from Martha Wilson's daughter, a simple knee-length design in pale blue wool that Martha insisted brought out her eyes. Her hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, fell in soft waves around her shoulders. This wasn't how she had imagined her wedding day. There was no expensive gown, no elaborate floral arrangements, no beaming parents or tearful bridesmaids, just a practical arrangement between two adults with complementary needs, as Thorne had put it. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Mrs. Caldwell entered, carrying a small box. "Almost ready, dear." "As ready as I'll ever be to marry a man I met 4 days ago," Eliza replied with a nervous laugh. The housekeeper smiled sympathetically. "I brought something for you, a little wedding tradition." She opened the box to reveal a delicate silver hairpin with a small sapphire. It was Catherine's, her something blue when she married Thorne. I thought she might have wanted you to have it today." Eliza stared at the hairpin, uncertain. "I don't know if Thorne would approve." "It was his idea," Mrs. Caldwell said softly. "He's a difficult man to understand sometimes, but he has his ways of showing consideration." Surprised, Eliza allowed the housekeeper to fasten the pin in her hair. The gesture touched her more deeply than she had expected. This small acknowledgement of his past marriage suggested Thorne wasn't simply erasing Catherine's memory, but finding a way to honor it while moving forward. Downstairs, the small gathering waited in the living room where the furniture had been rearranged to create a simple ceremonial space. Martha Wilson had brought flowers from her greenhouse, white roses and evergreen branches that filled the room with a fresh, woodsy scent. Jack Monroe and several other ranch hands stood awkwardly in their Sunday best, while Reverend Hayes reviewed his notes by the fireplace. Thorne stood near the window looking uncharacteristically formal in a dark suit and tie. When Eliza descended the stairs, his eyes found hers immediately. Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or appreciation, before his expression returned to its usual reserve. But she noticed his gaze lingering on the hairpin. The ceremony was brief and straightforward. They exchanged simple vows, focused on partnership, respect, and commitment. No flowery promises of eternal love, just honest statements of intention to build something meaningful together. When Reverend Hayes pronounced them husband and wife, Thorne hesitated only briefly before leaning down to place a chaste kiss on Eliza's lips, their first physical contact beyond handshakes, and his occasional guiding touch on her back. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft, the kiss over almost before it began. Yet Eliza felt a strange flutter in her chest that she hadn't anticipated. The small reception that followed was more relaxed than Eliza had expected. Martha had organized a buffet of home-cooked dishes, and someone had brought champagne. The ranch hands, initially reserved, grew more animated after a glass or two, sharing stories about life at Blackwell Ranch that had Eliza alternately laughing and marveling at the hardships they endured. "Did Thorne tell you about the time he rescued 15 calves during that blizzard 2 years back?" Jack asked, settling into the chair beside her. Found himself stranded in the north pasture when the storm hit early. Temperature dropped to 20 below. Instead of saving himself, he spent hours rounding up those calves and getting them to shelter. "He didn't mention it," Eliza said, glancing across the room where Thorne was deep in conversation with Reverend Hayes. "Nearly died of hypothermia," Jack continued, "but saved every last calf. That's the kind of man you married. Stubborn as hell, but loyal to a fault." Throughout the afternoon, Eliza collected these stories like precious gems, each one offering a glimpse of the complex man she had just promised to build a life with. The picture that emerged was of someone deeply committed to his land and his people, someone who shouldered responsibility without complaint and expected no recognition for his sacrifices. As the gathering wound down and guests began to leave, Eliza found herself standing beside Thorne on the porch, accepting congratulations and thanking people for coming. The easy formality of it, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell seeing off their guests, felt surreal. "You did well today," Thorne said quietly, as the last truck disappeared down the driveway. "It wasn't difficult," Eliza replied. "Everyone has been kind. They're good people. They'll accept you as one of their own soon enough." He hesitated. "The hairpin suits you. Thank you for wearing it." Before Eliza could respond, the sound of an approaching vehicle drew their attention. James Reed's black SUV rolled up the driveway, stopping directly in front of the house. Interrupting the celebration, Reed called as he stepped out, carrying an expensive-looking bottle of scotch. "I brought a wedding gift." Thorne's posture stiffened beside her. "Bit late for social calls, Reed. Never too late to congratulate the happy couple." Reed's smile was all teeth as he approached, offering the bottle to Eliza. "Mrs. Blackwell, you look lovely. A refreshing change from your usual New York power suits, I imagine." Eliza accepted the bottle with a polite smile, unsettled by his reference to her past. "You've done your research. I like to know who I'm dealing with." Reed's gaze was calculating. Bennett Investments was quite the up-and-coming firm before the scandal, though I understand you weren't implicated in your fiancé's indiscretions. The casual mention of her past sent a chill through Eliza that had nothing to do with the cold. "Ex-fiancé," she corrected. "And that's all behind me now." "Of course." Reed turned to Thorne. "Congratulations on your marriage. Perhaps now you'll reconsider my offer for the North Pasture. Family men often find themselves needing capital for expansions." "My answer hasn't changed," Thorne replied, his voice low and controlled. "The land isn't for sale," Reed shrugged. "Everything has a price, Blackwell. It's just a matter of finding the right number. His eyes shifted back to Eliza, or the right pressure point. The threat, thinly veiled as it was, hung in the air between them. Eliza felt Thorne shift closer to her, his arm coming around her waist in a protective gesture that seemed instinctive rather than calculated. "You should leave," Thorne said quietly. "Now." Reed held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just being neighborly. Enjoy your wedding night." With a final smirk, he returned to his SUV and drove away, leaving a cloud of exhaust hanging in the cold air. "What was that about?" Eliza asked once they were back inside. Thorne ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "Reed doesn't just want land for resorts, he's after water rights. The North Pasture has 3 natural springs that feed most of the county's water table. If he controlled those, he'd control everything," Eliza finished, her business mind immediately grasping the implications. "Exactly, and he's not above using personal information as leverage." Thorne's expression darkened. "I'm sorry he brought up your past." "It's public record," Eliza said, trying to sound unconcerned. "I knew it would follow me." They lapsed into awkward silence, suddenly very aware that they were alone in the house as husband and wife. The reality of their new arrangement seemed to fill the space between them. "I should check on the livestock," Thorne said finally. The hands took the night off for the wedding. "I'll help," Eliza offered, eager for something to do. He looked surprised but didn't object. Together they bundled up against the cold and made their way to the barn. Working side by side, they checked water troughs, distributed feed, and ensured the heating systems were functioning properly. Eliza followed Thorne's instructions carefully, determined to prove herself useful. "You're a quick learner," he observed as they finished the evening chores. "I adapt," she replied simply. Back at the house, they shared a quiet dinner from the reception leftovers. The silence between them was less strained now, comfortable in a way Eliza hadn't expected. When they finally retired for the night, Thorne walked her to her bedroom door. "Thank you," he said, his voice gruff with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "For today, for agreeing to this." In the dim hallway light, his scarred face looked softer somehow, more vulnerable. Impulsively, Eliza reached up and touched his cheek, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the scar. "I think we both got what we needed," she said softly. For a moment, he leaned almost imperceptibly into her touch. Then he straightened, clearing his throat. "Good night, Eliza," he said, stepping back. "Good night, husband," she replied, testing the word. A ghost of a smile touched his lips before he turned and walked down the hall to his own room. Alone in her bedroom, Eliza removed Catherine's hairpin carefully, placing it on the dresser. As she did, she noticed a leather-bound book partially visible on the bookshelf beside her bed. Curious, she pulled it out and found it was a photo album. The first page showed a younger, unscarred Thorne standing beside a beautiful woman with laughing eyes and dark hair. Catherine. They looked happy, their arms around each other, the ranch visible in the background. As Eliza turned the pages, she saw their life unfold, working together with the horses, celebrating holidays, building the very home she now occupied. The final photos showed Catherine in a hospital bed, her face thin but her smile still radiant. Thorne sat beside her, holding her hand, his expression a mixture of love and devastation. Eliza closed the album gently, understanding now why this room, Catherine's room, had felt so lived in despite being prepared for a guest. Thorne hadn't erased his wife's presence. He had preserved it, keeping her memory close even as he moved forward. It was a gesture of profound love and loyalty that spoke volumes about the man she had married. Whatever else came of their arrangement, Eliza knew she could trust Thorne Blackwell's integrity. Perhaps in time, she could earn the kind of devotion he had shown Catherine. With that thought warming her heart, Eliza prepared for her first night as Mrs. Blackwell, feeling for the first time since arriving in Montana that she might have found not just shelter, but a true home. The days following the wedding fell into a rhythm that surprised Eliza with its naturalness. Each morning she woke before sunrise to share breakfast with Thorne. He would outline the day's ranch operations while she took notes, asking questions that grew more informed as her understanding of the business deepened. After breakfast, they would part ways. Thorne to handle the physical work of the ranch, Eliza to the office he had cleared for her use. The office, a converted bedroom on the first floor, contained filing cabinets, a solid oak desk, and a relatively new computer. It was here that Eliza began to truly understand the scope of Blackwell Ranch. "These profit margins are impressive," she told Thorne one evening, a week after their wedding. They sat at the kitchen table, financial statements spread between them. "But your cash flow management could be optimized." Thorne looked up from his coffee. "How so?" "You're carrying too much inventory in the meat processing operation. It ties up capital unnecessarily." She pushed a spreadsheet toward him. "And your equipment loans are at higher interest rates than they should be. We could refinance and save about $30,000 annually." He studied the numbers, nodding slowly. "Catherine handled most of the business side. After she died, I did my best, but..." He trailed off, then looked at her directly. "This is why I needed you." The simple statement, delivered without pretense, warmed Eliza more than she cared to admit. In New York, she had been respected for her financial acumen, but always with an undercurrent of surprise, as if her success were somehow unexpected because of her gender. Thorne's straightforward acknowledgement of her skills was refreshing. "I'll draft a refinancing proposal tomorrow," she said, "and work on a new inventory management system for the processing plant." "Good." He gathered the papers, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "You're making this place better already." That night, Eliza lay awake thinking about how quickly her life had changed. 2 weeks ago, she had been a disgraced financial analyst with no future. Now she was applying her expertise to a multi-million-dollar ranch operation, making improvements that would have real impact. There was satisfaction in that, a sense of purpose she had feared she might never find again. Her thoughts drifted to Thorne. Their relationship was evolving, though not in ways she had anticipated. They worked well together, their different strengths complementing each other. During the day, they operated as business partners, efficient and focused. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation that grew more comfortable with each passing day. But there were still boundaries between them. Thorne maintained a certain reserve, and Eliza respected it. They slept in separate rooms, interacted with careful courtesy, and avoided personal topics. It was exactly the arrangement they had agreed upon. Practical, straightforward, mutually beneficial. So why did she find herself increasingly curious about the man behind the practicality? Why did she notice the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he was pleased, or how his hands, rough from years of physical labor, could handle delicate tasks with surprising gentleness? The following morning brought another heavy snowfall. Eliza woke to find Thorne already gone, his side of the breakfast table empty. Mrs. Caldwell explained he had left before dawn to check on cattle in the north pasture where drifting snow threatened to trap the animals. "Winter's settling in early this year," the housekeeper said, concern evident in her voice. "Radio says this storm could last 3 days." Eliza spent the morning in her office but found it difficult to concentrate. The wind howled around the eaves of the house, rattling the windows with increasing fury. By noon, the snow was falling so heavily that the view from her office window was nothing but a white blur. When Thorne hadn't returned by 2 o'clock, Eliza felt the first stirrings of worry. She tried to dismiss the feeling. He was experienced, knew the land better than anyone. But something nagged at her. She found Jack in the barn, where he was checking on the horses. "Should Thorne be back by now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Jack frowned. "He radioed about an hour ago, said he was heading back, but the North Trail can be treacherous in this weather." "Treacherous how?" "Drops off into a ravine on one side, in low visibility." He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. Eliza's worry sharpened. "Shouldn't we check on him? Boss wouldn't appreciate us risking more people in this weather." Jack glanced at the barn door where snow swirled in vicious gusts. "Give him another hour." But Eliza couldn't shake her unease. She returned to the house and paced the kitchen, checking the window every few minutes for any sign of Thorne's truck. When another hour passed with no word, she pulled on Catherine's winter gear, insulated coveralls, heavy boots, and a parka rated for sub-zero temperatures. She was halfway to the barn when she heard the distant sound of an engine. Through the blowing snow, she could just make out the shape of Thorne's truck crawling up the driveway. Relief flooded through her, so intense it left her momentarily lightheaded. The truck parked and Thorne emerged, moving stiffly. Even from a distance, Eliza could see he was exhausted. She hurried toward him. "You're frozen," she said, noting his blue-tinged lips and the ice crusting his eyebrows. "Truck got stuck twice," he replied, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Had to dig it out." Without thinking, Eliza took his arm, supporting him as they walked to the house. His clothes were stiff with ice, his hands too numb to properly grip the door handle. Once inside, she helped him remove his frozen outerwear. "You need to get warm," she said, guiding him to the sofa nearest the fireplace. "I'll make coffee." "No time," he protested weakly. "Still have to check the eastern fences." "Jack can handle it," Eliza said firmly. "You're no good to anyone with hypothermia." To her surprise, he didn't argue further. She built up the fire, then brought him coffee laced with whiskey and a thick quilt from the linen closet. As she draped the quilt around his shoulders, he caught her hand. "Thank you," he said, his gray eyes meeting hers. "It's just coffee," she replied lightly. "Not just for that, for caring enough to worry." The simple statement caught her off guard. She sat beside him on the sofa, suddenly aware of how close they were, of the warmth radiating from the fire and between their bodies. "Of course I worried," she said softly. "We're partners now." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a tension releasing from his jaw. For a moment she thought he might say more. Instead, he sipped his coffee, his hand still holding hers beneath the quilt. They sat in comfortable silence as the storm raged outside, the fire casting dancing shadows across the room. Gradually, color returned to Thorne's face, and his breathing became deeper, more relaxed. Eliza realized he was falling asleep, his head nodding slightly before he caught himself. "You should rest," she said, moving to stand. His hand tightened around hers. "Stay, just for a while." She settled back beside him, and after a moment's hesitation, he shifted so her head could rest against his shoulder. It was the most intimate they had been since their brief wedding kiss. Eliza found herself acutely aware of his breathing, the solid warmth of him, the faint scent of pine and leather that seemed permanently embedded in his clothes. "I saw the photo album," she admitted quietly. "Catherine looked like a wonderful person." Thorne was silent for so long that Eliza thought he might have fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "She was smart, kind, stronger than she looked." He paused. "She fought the cancer for 2 years, never complained, not once." "I'm sorry," Eliza said, meaning it deeply. "After she died, I didn't think I'd ever want anyone else in this house." Thought I'd just work until the ranch consumed me or I died trying to keep it going. His thumb moved absently across the back of her hand. Then you stepped off that bus, looking lost and determined all at once. Eliza smiled against his shoulder, and you proposed marriage within an hour. Never been one to waste time once I make a decision. A hint of humor colored his voice. But I didn't expect... What? To feel comfortable with you so quickly. The admission seemed to cost him, each word carefully chosen. To find myself looking forward to breakfast, to hearing your thoughts on the business, to just having you here. The confession, simple as it was, made Eliza's heart beat faster. This wasn't part of their practical arrangement. This was something more, something neither of them had anticipated. I feel the same way, she said quietly. I came here with nothing, expecting nothing. But this place, this life, it suits me in ways I never imagined. Outside, the storm intensified, snow piling against the windows and wind moaning through the eaves. But inside, beside the crackling fire with Thorne's solid presence beside her, Eliza felt completely safe for the first time in months. They sat together until the light faded from the windows and the fire burned low. When Thorne finally stirred, it was with obvious reluctance. I should check in with Jack, make sure everything's secure for the night, he said, though he made no move to rise. It can wait a few more minutes, Eliza replied, not ready to break the unexpected intimacy of the moment. His arm came around her shoulders, a tentative gesture that felt both protective and seeking protection. Catherine would have liked you, he said suddenly. She always worried about what would happen to the ranch, to me, when she was gone. She made me promise not to let everything fall apart. You've kept that promise, Eliza assured him. The ranch is thriving. Thanks to you, it will do even better. In that moment, with snow sealing them away from the outside world and the fire warming their shared space, Eliza realized their practical arrangement was transforming into something neither of them had expected, something that might eventually heal them both. 3 weeks after the wedding, Eliza finally visited her aunt's cottage. The winter storm had passed, leaving behind 3 feet of snow and temperatures that hovered just above zero. Thorne had insisted on accompanying her, his expression grim as he helped her navigate the snow-covered path to the dilapidated structure. The cottage looked even worse than Eliza remembered. The roof had partially collapsed under the weight of the snow, and frost coated the inside walls where wind whistled through countless gaps in the siding. Standing in what would have been the main room, Eliza shivered despite her heavy winter gear. I would have died here, she said softly, the reality of it hitting her fully for the first time. Thorne, examining the frost-covered windows, nodded. First real cold snap would have done it. Hypothermia is not a pleasant way to go. Thank you, she said, turning to face him, for offering me an alternative. I'm not sure I've properly expressed my gratitude. He looked uncomfortable with her thanks. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. Still is, she assured him. But I recognize that you took a chance on a stranger. Not such a stranger anymore, he replied, his gaze holding hers for a moment before he turned away. We should check if there's anything you want to salvage before we head back. There wasn't much. Most of Aunt Marjorie's personal belongings had been removed years ago. Eliza found a few old photographs, a tarnished silver hand mirror, and a cedar box containing letters tied with faded ribbon. She packed these carefully in the backpack she'd brought, a small collection of her only family connection in Montana. As they were leaving, Thorne paused at the doorway. We should talk to Roberts about this place. Roberts, Abe Roberts, local contractor, could tear it down, salvage what materials are still good. Eliza frowned. Tear it down? But it's the only thing I own outright. Land's what has value, Thorne explained. Structure's a liability in this condition. You still own the property. 5 acres, if I remember right. Might be worth something someday. The practical assessment made sense, yet Eliza felt a twinge of loss at the thought of demolishing her aunt's home, dilapidated as it was. She took one last look at the cottage before following Thorne back to the truck. "Speaking of property," she said as they drove, "I've been reviewing the ranch's boundary surveys. There's something odd about the paperwork for the north pasture." Thorne's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What kind of odd?" "The most recent survey doesn't match the one from 5 years ago. The boundaries shifted about a quarter mile at the northwest corner, reducing your total acreage." His jaw clenched. "Reed, you think he falsified the survey?" "Wouldn't put it past him. He's been after that pasture for years." Thorne's expression darkened. "That's where the main spring is located. Controls most of the water that feeds the eastern valley." "I'll dig deeper," Eliza promised. "If the survey was tampered with, we'll find evidence." When they returned to the ranch, Eliza headed straight to her office to continue her investigation. She spent hours comparing property records, survey maps, and water rights documentation. The more she examined, the more convinced she became that someone had methodically altered the records to chip away at Blackwell Ranch's legal boundaries. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear Thorne enter until he placed a cup of coffee beside her. "You missed dinner," he said, nodding toward the window where darkness had fallen. "I'm sorry. I lost track of time." She gestured to the documents spread across her desk. "Someone has been manipulating the property records for years, not just the recent survey. Look at this." Thorne leaned over her shoulder, his presence warm at her back as he studied the documents. Eliza tried to ignore the flutter in her stomach at his proximity. "The changes are subtle," she explained, "but when you overlay the surveys from the past 15 years, you can see a pattern of encroachment along the northwestern boundary, exactly where the springs are located." "Can you prove it was Reed?" "Not yet, but I requested the original survey filings from the county recorder's office. They should arrive next week." Thorne straightened, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "Good work." The simple praise warmed her more than it should have. She turned to face him and was struck by how tired he looked. Deep shadows under his eyes, lines of strain around his mouth. "Are you all right?" she asked. He ran a hand through his hair. "Fine. Just been a long day." But Eliza had become attuned to his moods over the past weeks. "Something's bothering you. Is it the property issue?" For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, leaning against the edge of her desk. "Got a call from Dr. Mercer today. Tim Hayes, Ethan's younger brother, was brought in with symptoms of arsenic poisoning." "Arsenic?" Eliza echoed, alarmed. "How?" "Well water at the Hayes farm. They're downstream from our north pasture springs." His expression was grim. "Someone's contaminating the water supply." The implication hung heavy between them. "You think Reed is behind this?" "Can't prove it, but the timing is suspicious. Hayes' family has always supported my refusal to sell. Tim was the most vocal at the last town council meeting." Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather. "Is Tim going to be all right?" "Mercer thinks so. They caught it early." Thorne rubbed his temples. "But if the contamination spreads, we need to warn people," Eliza said, already rising from her chair. "Mercer's testing other wells in the area. Should have results tomorrow." He caught her hand as she moved past him. "There's something else you should know." She paused, struck by the seriousness in his tone. "Reed came by the south field today while I was working. Said he knew about your ex-fiancée. Not just the fraud charges, specific details about your relationship that weren't in the news." Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. "What kinds of details?" "Personal things, intimate things." Thorne's voice was carefully controlled, but she could sense his anger beneath the surface. He implied he has contacts in New York who provided information. What does he want? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Same as always. The North pasture and water rights. Said he'd make sure your colorful past stayed private if I agreed to sell. Eliza sank back into her chair, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Her relationship with David hadn't just been professional. They'd been engaged, living together, planning a future. When his crimes came to light, the tabloids had dug into every aspect of their life, publishing distorted versions of private moments. It had been humiliating enough in New York. The thought of those stories reaching Broken Ridge, of watching respect turn to salacious curiosity in the eyes of people who had welcomed her. "I'll understand if you want to sell," she said quietly. "It's your ranch. Your decision." Thorne's expression hardened. "Like hell I'm selling. Reed doesn't get to threaten my wife and expect me to roll over." The fierce protectiveness in his voice stunned her. "But the stories are just stories," he interrupted. "Unless you committed fraud alongside your ex, I don't give a damn what tabloids said about your relationship, and neither will anyone else around here who matters." Tears pricked at Eliza's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them back, but not before Thorne noticed. His expression softened, and he knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. "Listen to me," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Everyone in this town has a past. Most folks are too busy trying to survive winter to gossip about yours." "It's not just gossip," she admitted. "Some of what they printed was true. I didn't know about the fraud, but I was naive. I ignored warning signs because I wanted to believe in him, in the life we were building. That makes you human, not criminal." Thorne's thumbs traced small circles on the backs of her hands. "We've all trusted the wrong people." Something in his tone made Eliza wonder if he was speaking from experience. She studied his face, the scar that ran from temple to jaw more pronounced in the dim office light. "Your scar," she said softly. "You've never told me how you got it." His hand stilled on hers, and for a moment she thought she had pushed too far. Then he released a slow breath. "Happened the year after Catherine died. I was in a bad place, drinking too much, taking risks I shouldn't have." His eyes met hers, unflinching. "Bar fight in Billings. Guy pulled a broken bottle, caught me across the face before I knew what was happening." "That must have been frightening," she said, resisting the urge to touch the jagged line that marked his cheek. "Wasn't the cut that scared me. It was realizing how close I'd come to throwing everything away, the ranch, Catherine's legacy, my own life." He straightened, his hands leaving hers. "Made me get my act together. Stop feeling sorry for myself and focus on what mattered." The revelation of vulnerability from this strong, self-contained man touched Eliza deeply. She stood, closing the distance between them. "Thank you for telling me," she said, and before she could second-guess herself, she reached up and traced the scar with gentle fingers. "And thank you for standing up to Reed." Thorne remained perfectly still under her touch, his eyes never leaving hers. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then the radio on his belt crackled to life, Jack calling from the barn about a pregnant mare showing signs of early labor. The interruption broke the tension. Thorne stepped back, his expression returning to its usual reserve. "I need to go," he said. "We'll talk more about Reed tomorrow." "Of course," Eliza replied, letting her hand fall back to her side. "I'll keep working on the property records." After he left, she stood motionless in the center of her office, her fingertips still tingling from the contact with his skin. Something had shifted between them tonight, another step beyond their practical arrangement into territory neither had anticipated. Outside, the winter night wrapped around the ranch like a cold blanket. But inside, Despite the threats gathering around them, Eliza felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the house's heating system and everything to do with the man who had just left the room. The town hall meeting was packed. Every resident of Broken Ridge crowded into the small municipal building. Eliza sat beside Thorne in the second row, acutely aware of the glances directed their way. News of the contaminated well water had spread quickly, along with whispers about James Reed's interest in the Blackwell property. Dr. Mercer stood at the podium, his expression grave as he addressed the gathered townspeople. Tests confirm arsenic contamination in 6 wells across the Eastern Valley, all downstream from the North Springs. Levels are highest near the Hayes property, decreasing as you move east. "What about the springs themselves?" someone called from the back. "Clean," Dr. Mercer replied. "Whatever contamination exists, it's entering the water table between the springs and the affected wells." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Eliza felt Thorne tense beside her. "This was deliberate," Reverend Hayes said, rising from his seat. His son Tim sat pale and thin beside him, still recovering from his poisoning. "Someone's targeting families who oppose selling to Reed Development." James Reed, sitting near the front, turned to face the crowd. "That's a serious accusation, Reverend. I hope you have evidence before slandering a respected business." 6 poisoned wells isn't evidence enough," Jack Monroe challenged. Reed's smile was cold. "Unfortunate coincidence. Old mining operations all through these hills could explain trace arsenic. Or perhaps someone with a grudge against progress is trying to frame me." His gaze settled meaningfully on Thorne. Eliza reached for her husband's hand, squeezing it in warning when she felt him shift forward. Mayor Wilson, Martha's husband, called for order. "We need facts, not accusations. Sheriff's Department is investigating, and the EPA has been notified. Meanwhile, we're arranging clean water delivery to affected households." The meeting continued with discussion of emergency measures, but Eliza couldn't focus on the words. She was watching Reed, who seemed entirely too composed for a man accused of poisoning his neighbors. When he caught her staring, he smiled and winked, the gesture sending a chill down her spine. After the meeting, as they walked to their truck through the bitter cold, Martha Wilson hurried to catch up with them. "Eliza," she called, her breath fogging in the freezing air. "A moment, please." Thorne nodded to Eliza. "I'll warm up the truck." Once he was out of earshot, Martha lowered her voice. "I thought you should know. Reed's been asking questions around town about you, about New York." Eliza's stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "Details about your engagement, the scandal." Martha's kind eyes were troubled. "He mentioned having photos, private messages, said they'd make interesting reading for the church auxiliary." The blood drained from Eliza's face. The private messages could only be the intimate texts she had exchanged with David during their engagement, messages that would humiliate her if made public in this conservative community. "I just wanted to warn you," Martha continued, squeezing Eliza's gloved hand. "Whatever he's threatening, don't let it sway you. People here care about who you are now, not mistakes from your past." Eliza managed a grateful smile, though her mind was racing. "Thank you, Martha." In the truck, Thorne noticed her distress immediately. "What happened?" She told him about Martha's warning, each word tasting bitter in her mouth. "He's going to expose everything, Thorne. Those messages were private, intimate. I'll never be able to show my face in town again." Thorne's expression darkened as he drove through the snow-covered streets. "Reed's playing a dangerous game. It's my reputation he's threatening, not yours. You're my wife," he said, the words carrying a conviction that startled her. "Your reputation is mine, and I protect what's mine." The fierce possessiveness in his voice should have offended her independent nature. Instead, it sent a surge of warmth through her core. In the weeks since their wedding, Thorne had become more than her business partner or convenient protector. He had become her champion, her confidant, her friend, and perhaps something more. Back at the ranch, they found the original survey documents had arrived from the county recorder's office. Eliza spent hours comparing them against the altered versions, building a case of systematic fraud. "Look at this," she called to Thorne, who was reviewing water test results at the kitchen table. "The original survey clearly shows the springs are fully within Blackwell property. Someone changed the coordinates by just enough to create ambiguity about the boundary line." Thorne examined the documents. "This is the evidence we need. First thing tomorrow, we take this to Sheriff Davis." That night brought another snowstorm. Howling winds driving snow against the windows with frightening force. Eliza lay awake in her bed, listening to the storm and thinking about the confrontation that lay ahead. Taking evidence against Reed to the authorities would escalate the conflict beyond repair. What would he do in retaliation? A sound from downstairs interrupted her thoughts. She glanced at the clock, 2:17 a.m. Thorne often checked the house during storms, but something about this noise felt different. She slipped from bed, pulling on a robe and stepping into the hallway. The sound came again, glass breaking, followed by a muffled thud. Not Thorne's careful movements, but something else. Someone else. Heart pounding, Eliza crept to the top of the stairs. The first floor was dark except for a flashlight beam sweeping across the living room. A figure moved in the shadows, methodically opening drawers and rifling through papers. An intruder, looking for the survey documents. Eliza backed away slowly, intending to wake Thorne, when a floorboard creaked beneath her foot. The flashlight beam instantly swung toward the stairs. "Who's there?" a male voice called. Instead of retreating, Eliza reached for the nearest weapon, a heavy brass candlestick on the hallway table, and stepped into view. "I've called the police," she lied, her voice steadier than she felt. "They'll be here any minute." The intruder laughed. "In this storm? I doubt it." He started up the stairs, and Eliza caught a glimpse of his face in the flashlight's glow, one of Reed's men, a hired hand she had seen at town meetings. "Just give me the survey documents, Mrs. Blackwell, and I'll be on my way." "Not a chance," she replied, gripping the candlestick tighter. He was halfway up the stairs when another sound froze them both, the distinctive click of a shotgun being cocked. "Take one more step toward my wife." Thorne's voice came from the darkness behind the intruder, "and they'll be scraping what's left of you off the wallpaper." The man slowly raised his hands, the flashlight casting eerie shadows across the stairwell. "Easy now, Blackwell. Reed just wants what's his." "Nothing here belongs to Reed," Thorne replied, his voice deadly calm. "Eliza, call Sheriff Davis." "Phones are down," the intruder said, a smirk evident in his voice. "Storm took out the lines, and cell service is spotty at best out here." "Then I guess it's just the three of us," Thorne replied, pressing the shotgun against the man's back. "Move downstairs slowly." As they descended, Eliza noticed something the intruder didn't. Thorne's hands shaking slightly, his face pale with more than just anger. He moved with a stiffness that hadn't been present the day before. In the living room, Thorne ordered the man onto his knees, keeping the shotgun trained on him while Eliza bound his wrists with cord from the fireplace tools. "You don't look so good, Blackwell," the intruder observed, watching Thorne with calculating eyes. "Feeling a bit under the weather?" A horrible suspicion formed in Eliza's mind. "Thorne, are you all right?" He swayed slightly, catching himself against the wall. "Fine, just tired." But he wasn't fine. In the dim light of the emergency lantern she had lit, she could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. His breathing was labored, his complexion ashen. "Did you drink the coffee in your thermos today?" she asked, a chill running through her that had nothing to do with the winter storm. Thorne's eyes met hers, understanding dawning. "You think Reed poisoned the Hayes family through their well," she said quietly. "What if he's found another way to target you directly?" The intruder's smile confirmed her fears. "Mr. Reed said you were smart, Mrs. Blackwell. Too smart for your own good." Thorne's legs buckled then, the shotgun wavering in his grip. Eliza lunged forward, catching the weapon before it could fall. She kept it trained on the intruder as Thorne slumped against the wall, sliding to the floor. "What was in the coffee?" she demanded, fear making her voice sharp. "Just a little something to make him more cooperative," the man replied. "Nothing fatal, probably, unless he drank the whole thermos." Thorne's eyes were starting to lose focus. "Eliza," he murmured, reaching for her. She was trapped in an impossible situation. An armed intruder, a poisoned husband, a snowstorm cutting them off from help, and the nearest neighbor miles away. "The antidote's simple," the intruder continued conversationally. "Mr. Reed would be happy to provide it, in exchange for those survey documents and a signed deed to the north pasture." Eliza looked at Thorne, his strong body betrayed by whatever toxin was working through his system. Then at the intruder, whose confident smirk told her he believed he had won. "The documents are in the safe in the office," she said, her mind racing ahead, formulating a plan. "I'll get them for you." Thorne's hand caught her wrist. "No," he managed. Let him have me. Trust me," she whispered, squeezing his hand before rising to her feet. "I'm not giving up anything, especially not you." Eliza moved toward the office, her mind racing. The shotgun felt heavy and unfamiliar in her hands, but she kept it trained on the intruder. "You're coming with me," she told him. "One wrong move and I pull the trigger." The man smirked. "You won't shoot me. City girls don't have the stomach for it." Eliza stepped closer, letting him see her eyes. "I lost everything once already. I won't lose it again, especially not to someone like you." Something in her expression must have convinced him because the smirk faltered. She motioned him to his feet and marched him toward the office, keeping a careful distance. "Stay with me, Thorne," she called over her shoulder. "Keep talking to me." "Still here," he replied, his voice weaker than before. "Be careful, Eliza." In the office, she directed the intruder to stand against the far wall while she approached the safe hidden behind a painting. The combination was Catherine's birthday. Thorne had shared it with her the previous week when they were reviewing insurance documents. "Mr. Reed will get what he wants eventually," the man said, watching her closely. "He always does, and now he's got leverage." "The poison," Eliza said, turning the dial carefully. "What exactly was it?" "Something exotic, untraceable. Mr. Reed has connections overseas." "And the antidote?" The intruder shrugged. "Above my pay grade. All I know is Mr. Reed has it, and your husband has maybe 12 hours before organ failure sets in." Eliza's hands trembled slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "Then we better make sure this transaction happens quickly." The safe clicked open. Inside were the original survey documents, the ranch's deed, insurance policies, and something else, a small revolver. Eliza removed the gun with practiced ease that seemed to surprise the intruder. "Another thing you don't know about me," she said, noting his expression. "My father insisted his daughter know how to handle firearms, said New York was dangerous." "Lady, you are full of surprises," he muttered. Eliza gathered the survey documents and the deed, placing them in a folder. Then she did something the intruder couldn't see, slipped a small flash drive from the safe into her pocket. Thorne had shown her their digital backup system, including copies of all the original documents with timestamps and authentication certificates. "Here," she said, handing him the folder. "Now about that antidote. Mr. Reed will deliver it personally once he confirms these are genuine." Eliza raised the revolver, pointing it directly at his forehead. That's not how this works. You tell me where the antidote is right now, or I put a bullet in your head and take my chances finding it myself. The calm certainty in her voice seemed to unnerve him more than any shouting could have. He swallowed hard. Inside pocket of my jacket. Don't move, she ordered, approaching cautiously. With one hand keeping the gun steady, she used the other to reach into his jacket, finding a small vial. How do I know this is the real antidote? Why would I carry a fake? It was my insurance policy in case something went wrong. It made sense. Reed wouldn't send his man into a dangerous situation without protection. Still keeping the gun trained on him, Eliza backed toward the office door. Now what? The intruder asked. You can't let me go, and you can't keep me here while you tend to your husband. You're right, Eliza agreed. Then she swung the revolver hard against his temple. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious but breathing. That's for poisoning my husband. She quickly bound his ankles with computer cables, then rushed back to Thorne, who had slumped further down the wall, his breathing shallow. Thorne, she called, kneeling beside him. I've got the antidote. Stay with me. His eyes fluttered open. The documents? Safe, she assured him, showing him the vial. How do we administer this? Injection, he murmured. Medical kit. Kitchen cabinet. Eliza ran to the kitchen, finding the ranch's well-stocked first aid supplies. When she returned, Thorne had lost consciousness. With shaking hands, she filled a syringe with the clear liquid from the vial, then hesitated, realizing she didn't know where to inject it. Thorne, please, she whispered, patting his face gently. I need you to wake up. His eyes opened slightly, focusing on the syringe. Thigh, he managed. Muscle. She pushed aside his pajama pants, exposing his thigh, and plunged the needle in, as she'd seen done in medical shows, depressing the plunger smoothly. Then she waited, counting each of his breaths, her hand clasped tightly around his. Outside, the storm continued to rage, cutting them off from help. Eliza knew she needed to secure the house, check on their prisoner, and somehow get medical assistance, but she couldn't bring herself to leave Thorne's side. Please work, she whispered, pressing her forehead against his. I can't do this without you. Minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Then, almost imperceptibly, his breathing seemed to strengthen. His hand twitched in hers, fingers curling weakly around her own. Eliza, he murmured, his voice hoarse but clearer than before. Relief flooded through her so intensely that tears sprang to her eyes. I'm here, you're going to be okay. Reed's man, unconscious in the office. I took back the documents and kept the flash drive safe. She brushed hair from his forehead. But we need to get you to a doctor. Thorne tried to sit up, grimacing with the effort. Storm's too bad. Roads will be impassable. We have to try, Eliza insisted. We don't know what was in that poison, or if the antidote will fully counteract it. With her help, Thorne managed to get to his feet, though he leaned heavily against her. Radio in the barn, he said, stronger than the house phone, might reach emergency services. You can't go out in this storm in your condition. Have to, he insisted. Only works from the barn transmitter. Eliza realized arguing would waste precious time. Then we go together. I'm not leaving you. She helped him into his winter gear, layering clothes against the brutal cold. Before they ventured outside, she checked on their prisoner, still unconscious, securely bound. She placed the shotgun and survey documents in a waterproof bag they could carry. The moment they stepped outside, the storm's fury hit them like a physical blow. Wind-driven snow reduced visibility to mere feet, and the temperature was well below zero. Thorne stumbled beside her, still weakened by the poison, but determinedly putting one foot in front of the other. Lean on me, Eliza urged, wrapping her arm around his waist. Together they fought their way across the yard, the 70 yards to the barn feeling like miles. Twice Thorne nearly fell, and Eliza's own strength was failing by the time they reached the barn door. Inside, the relative stillness felt like a miracle. The livestock shifted restlessly in their stalls, disturbed by the storm and the late-night intrusion. Thorne directed her to the back office where the radio equipment sat. His hands were too unsteady to operate the controls, so he talked her through the process. "Channel 16, he instructed, emergency frequency. Eliza adjusted the dials, then pressed the transmit button. "This is Blackwell Ranch calling any emergency services. We have a medical emergency. Man poisoned, condition critical. Storm has us cut off from town." Static answered her. She repeated the call twice more before a crackled response came through. "This is Montana Highway Patrol. We copy your emergency. Can you identify your location and condition?" Relief made her voice shake as she provided details. The patrolman confirmed they would attempt to reach them with a snowmobile rescue team, but it might take hours given the storm's intensity. "We'll be here," Eliza assured him. When she turned back to Thorne, she found him slumped in the office chair, eyes closed but breathing steadily. The antidote seemed to be working, but he was far from recovered. "Help is coming," she told him, taking his hand. "We just have to hold on." His eyes opened, finding hers with unexpected clarity. "You saved my life. You would have done the same for me." "Not the point." His fingers tightened around hers. "You could have given Reed what he wanted. Saved yourself the trouble." "This is my home too," she said simply. "Our home. I wasn't going to let him take it." Something shifted in Thorne's expression, a softening, a recognition. "When did that happen?" he asked quietly. "When did what happen?" "When did this become your home? When did I become—" He trailed off, seemingly unable to finish the thought. Eliza understood what he couldn't say. When had their practical arrangement transformed into something that would make her risk everything to save him? "I don't know exactly," she admitted. "It just happened, day by day. Working together, talking over dinner, facing Reed's threats side by side." She met his gaze steadily. "Somewhere along the way, you became important to me, more important than I expected." Thorne reached up, his hand cupping her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Same for me." The simple words carried more weight than flowery declarations ever could. Eliza turned her face into his palm, letting herself acknowledge what had been growing between them for weeks. They remained in the barn for hours, Thorne drifting in and out of consciousness, while Eliza kept radio contact with the rescue team. By dawn, the storm had weakened enough for the snowmobiles to reach them. Paramedics quickly assessed Thorne's condition, preparing him for transport. "Your husband is stable," the lead paramedic told Eliza, "but we need to get him to the hospital in Billings for proper treatment." "I'm coming with him," she said, not a question but a statement of fact. "What about the man in the house?" one of the patrolmen asked after she'd explained the night's events. "Take him in for breaking and entering, assault, and attempted murder," Eliza replied, "and tell Sheriff Davis we'll be filing formal charges against James Reed as soon as my husband is stable." As they loaded Thorne onto the rescue sled, he caught her hand. "The documents," he reminded her. "All safe," she assured him, patting her pocket where the flash drive remained secure. "Reed won't get what he wants. Not the land, not the water rights, not our future. Our future." The words felt right, no longer just about a practical arrangement, but about the life they were building together, a life worth fighting for. The Billings Regional Hospital hummed with quiet efficiency as Eliza sat beside Thorne's bed, her fingers intertwined with his. 3 days had passed since the snowmobile rescue team had transported them through the storm. The doctors had identified the poison as a rare compound, derived from oleander, potentially fatal without the antidote, but treatable once they knew what they were fighting. Thorne was recovering, his color improving hourly, though weakness still plagued him. The doctors had insisted on keeping him under observation, concerned about potential kidney damage from the toxin. "You should get some rest," he told Eliza, studying her face with concern. "You've barely slept." "I'm fine," she insisted, though exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. In truth, she'd scarcely left his side since their arrival, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair and subsisting on cafeteria food. The events of that night, the intruder, the poison, the desperate journey through the blizzard, had crystallized something within her. The thought of losing Thorne was unbearable in a way that went far beyond their practical arrangement. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Sheriff Davis entered, his weathered face solemn beneath his regulation hat. "Mrs. Blackwell, Mr. Blackwell," he greeted them. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been kicked by a bull," Thorne replied, "but improving." "Good to hear." The sheriff pulled up a chair. "I've got updates on the investigation. Reed's man, Gareth Sloan, is in custody. He's talking, trying to cut a deal." "And Reed?" Eliza asked. "That's where it gets interesting. When we went to question him, he was gone, packed up and disappeared." Sheriff Davis removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "But he left evidence behind. Sloan told us where to look, hidden safe in Reed's office. We found vials of the same poison that was used on you, along with documentation of payments to surveyors for falsifying property records." "So you can charge him," Thorne said, sitting up straighter despite his weakness. "Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, criminal endangerment. The list is long." The sheriff's expression hardened. "And the EPA is investigating the arsenic contamination. Preliminary findings suggest it was deliberately introduced into the groundwater through a series of perforated pipes buried along the Hayes property line. He won't get away with this," Eliza said, her voice firm with conviction. "No, ma'am, he won't. We've issued warrants in 3 states. It's just a matter of time." Sheriff Davis stood, replacing his hat. "One more thing. Those documents you saved, the county recorder is reviewing them. Looks like at least 3 other ranches had their boundaries tampered with, all adjacent to water sources." After the sheriff left, Eliza and Thorne sat in silence, processing the news. "It's bigger than just our ranch," Thorne said finally. "Reed was systematically targeting water rights across the county." "Control the water, control everything," Eliza murmured, recalling Thorne's words from weeks ago. "We stopped him." Thorne's hand tightened around hers. "You stopped him." A nurse interrupted, arriving to check Thorne's vitals. As she worked, she chatted amiably. "You've had quite the stream of visitors. Half the town's been through the waiting room. Martha Wilson brought enough casseroles to feed the entire hospital staff." Eliza smiled, touched by the community's response. The practical arrangement she and Thorne had entered into had expanded to include an entire town of people who looked out for each other. Later that afternoon, Jack Monroe arrived with news from the ranch. "Everything's under control," he assured them, settling his large frame into the visitor's chair. "Hands are working overtime to cover your absence. Tim Hayes is feeling better, came by to help with the horses, said he owed you both." "He doesn't owe us anything," Thorne replied. "That's not how folks see it. You and Mrs. Blackwell stood up to Reed when nobody else would." Jack's weathered face creased in a rare smile. "Town's calling you 2 heroes." After Jack left, Eliza stood by the window, watching snow fall gently over the hospital parking lot. So different from the violent storm that had nearly claimed Thorne's life. Behind her, she heard Thorne shift in the bed. "Heroes," he said quietly. "Don't feel much like a hero. I got poisoned and you had to save me." She turned to face him. "We saved each other. That's what partners do. Is that what we are? Partners? The question hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond their original agreement. Eliza moved back to his bedside, studying his face, the strong jawline, the scar that no longer seemed harsh but simply part of him, the gray eyes that watched her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. "We started as partners," she said carefully, "but I think we've become something more." "What would you call it?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion he rarely displayed. Eliza took a deep breath. "I'd call it falling in love. Not the way I expected, not the way I planned, but real all the same." For a moment, Thorne was perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Then he reached for her hand, drawing her closer until she was perched on the edge of his hospital bed. "I never thought I'd love anyone after Catherine," he admitted, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Didn't think I deserved it or was capable of it. Then you came along, this city woman who didn't know the first thing about ranch life but was willing to marry a scarred stranger to survive winter." "Not such a stranger now," she echoed his words from weeks ago. "No," he agreed, a smile touching his lips. "Not a stranger at all." He tugged her hand gently, pulling her down until their faces were inches apart. Unlike their brief, chaste wedding kiss, this one held promise. His lips met hers with a tenderness that made her chest ache, his free hand coming up to cradle her face as if she were something precious. When they parted, Eliza rested her forehead against his. "This wasn't in our agreement," she whispered. "I'm willing to renegotiate terms," he replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. A week later, Thorne was released from the hospital with strict instructions to rest and continue medications to support his kidney function. As Jack drove them back to the ranch, Eliza watched the Montana landscape unfold before them, vast, challenging, beautiful in its stark winter simplicity, so different from the crowded Manhattan streets she had once called home. "Look," Thorne said, pointing ahead as they crested the final hill. Blackwell Ranch came into view, but not as they had left it. Dozens of trucks and cars lined the driveway. People milled about the yard, and a banner hung from the porch roof. "Welcome home, Blackwells." "What in the world?" Eliza murmured. Jack chuckled. Town wanted to show their support. Martha organized it all. Said if Reed was counting on isolating you two, he picked the wrong community to mess with. As they pulled up to the house, familiar faces appeared. Martha and Mayor Wilson, Reverend Hayes and his sons, Dr. Mercer, Mrs. Caldwell, and dozens of others. Many Eliza recognized from town meetings and church services, some she knew only by sight. All were smiling, waving, calling out greetings. "I don't understand," Eliza said, overwhelmed by the reception. Thorne squeezed her hand. "This is what community means in places like Broken Ridge. When someone takes a stand against a threat to all of us, people remember." Martha approached the truck as Jack helped Thorne out, her kind face beaming. "Welcome home, you two. We've got the house warm, food prepared, and everything in order." "You didn't have to do all this," Eliza said, blinking back unexpected tears. "Of course we did," Martha replied, embracing her. "You're one of us now." The words hit Eliza with surprising force. One of us. Not an outsider, not the disgraced New Yorker, not even just Thorne's practical wife. She belonged here, had been accepted into this tight-knit community that protected its own. Inside, the house had been meticulously cleaned, fresh flowers placed on tables, and the refrigerator stocked with labeled dishes. On the kitchen table sat an envelope with the county seal. "That came yesterday," Jack explained. "Official recognition of the original property boundaries. Reed's falsifications have been invalidated." Thorne opened the envelope, confirming the restoration of Blackwell Ranch's rightful borders, including the disputed North Pasture and Springs. His expression reflected not triumph but relief. The land his family had stewarded for generations was secure. As neighbors and friends filled their home with warmth and conversation, Eliza found herself watching Thorne. Despite his physical weakness, he stood tall among his people, accepting their good wishes with quiet dignity. This was the man she had married for practical reasons and stayed with for entirely different ones. When the gathering finally began to disperse as evening approached, Thorne found her in the kitchen, washing dishes despite Martha's insistence that everything had been taken care of. "Old habits," she explained with a smile. "I needed a moment of normalcy." He leaned against the counter beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Nothing about our situation has been normal." "No," she agreed, "but somehow it feels right anyway." Thorne took the dish from her hands, setting it aside, then turned her to face him. "I have something to say. Something I should have said before now." Eliza's heart quickened at the intensity in his gaze. "I love you," he said simply. "Not because you saved my life, not because you saved the ranch, though I'm grateful for both. I love you because of who you are. Smart, brave, determined. Because somehow this practical arrangement turned into the best decision I ever made." The words she had longed to hear, spoken in his straightforward way, without embellishment but with absolute sincerity. Eliza wound her arms around his neck, careful of his still healing body. "I love you too," she replied, "and I'm exactly where I need to be." Outside, another winter storm was gathering, snow beginning to fall as darkness descended. But inside Blackwell Ranch, surrounded by the community that had embraced them and wrapped in each other's arms, Eliza and Thorne had everything they needed to weather whatever came next. Spring came to Broken Ridge with surprising gentleness. Snow melted gradually, revealing tender green shoots beneath. The creek beds swelled with crystal-clear runoff from the mountains, and the first calves of the season wobbled on uncertain legs in the south pasture. 3 months had passed since Thorne's poisoning. The ranch operations had returned to normal, with the added security of motion sensors and cameras installed around the perimeter. James Reed remained at large, though his assets had been frozen and his development company dismantled amid multiple criminal investigations. Eliza stood on the front porch, coffee mug warming her hands as she watched the sunrise paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and pink. The previous day had brought news from Sheriff Davis. Reed had been apprehended trying to cross the Canadian border. The legal proceedings would be lengthy, but with Sloane's testimony and the evidence recovered from Reed's office, conviction seemed certain. "Penny for your thoughts," Thorne said, stepping onto the porch behind her. His recovery had been slower than either of them would have liked, but each day brought improvement. The doctors were optimistic about his long-term prognosis, though they warned some kidney function might be permanently compromised. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Eliza replied, leaning back against him as his arms encircled her waist. "1 year ago, I was in Manhattan, planning a wedding to a man I thought I knew." "Regrets?" Thorne asked, his chin resting on top of her head. She turned in his embrace to face him. "Not a single one. That life wasn't real. It was built on lies and false promises. This," she gestured to the ranch spread before them, "this is real." His expression softened, the scar on his cheek no longer seeming harsh in the morning light. "I have something to show you," he said, taking her hand. "Been waiting for the right time." Curious, Eliza followed him to his truck. They drove across the property, past greening pastures where cattle grazed contentedly, through a stand of pines still dripping with morning dew, until they reached the north pasture. The main spring bubbled from the ground here, forming a clear pool before flowing downstream toward the valley. "I never brought you to this spot before," Thorne explained as they walked toward the spring. "Reed's threats made it seem too risky." The area was beautiful, Sheltered by a natural windbreak of rock and pine, the ground carpeted with early wildflowers. A wooden bench had been placed near the spring, weathered but solid. "Catherine and I used to come here," Thorne said quietly. "She called it the heart of the ranch, said as long as this spring flowed, Blackwell land would prosper." Eliza touched his arm, understanding the significance of him sharing this place with her. "It's beautiful. I've been thinking," he continued, his voice taking on the deliberate tone she'd come to recognize when he was broaching an important subject, "about our arrangement." A momentary flicker of uncertainty passed through her. "Our marriage, you mean?" "Yes." He guided her to the bench, sitting beside her with their hands still linked. "We started with a practical agreement, a business partnership with mutual benefits. And now?" she prompted when he paused. "Now I'm thinking we should make it real. Not just legally, but in every way." His gray eyes held hers steadily. "I want to renew our vows, Eliza, not as a practical arrangement, but as a real marriage, because I love you and I want everyone to know it." Emotion welled in Eliza's chest, so intense she could barely speak. "I'd like that," she managed finally. "Very much." From his pocket, Thorne withdrew a small velvet box. "This was my grandmother's," he said, opening it to reveal a vintage diamond ring with delicate filigree work around the band. "Catherine had her own ring, one that suited her. I've kept this all these years, waiting for the right moment, the right person." Eliza's eyes filled with tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the morning light in flashes of brilliant fire. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Like its new owner," he replied, the simple compliment all the more powerful for its rarity. They sat together by the spring as the day brightened around them, talking of plans for the ranch, for their future, for the renewal ceremony they would share with the community that had embraced them. 6 weeks later, on a perfect early summer day, Eliza and Thorne stood before their friends and neighbors in the meadow near the North Spring. Reverend Hayes officiated as they exchanged new vows, not the practical promises of their first ceremony, but heartfelt declarations of love, commitment, and partnership. Martha Wilson had helped Eliza find a proper wedding dress this time, a simple but elegant design that made Thorne's eyes widen when he first saw her approaching across the meadow. Wildflowers formed her bouquet, and Catherine's sapphire hairpin once again secured her curls, a respectful acknowledgement of the past that had led them to this present. The celebration afterward was everything their first wedding hadn't been: joyous, relaxed, filled with laughter and dancing. Even Mrs. Caldwell let her usual reserve slip, tapping her foot to the fiddle music and accepting a glass of champagne. As evening approached, Thorne led Eliza away from the festivities, up to a small rise overlooking the ranch. The setting sun cast long shadows across the land, turning the hills golden and the distant mountains purple against the darkening sky. "Happy?" he asked, his arm secure around her waist. "Completely," she replied, leaning into his strength. "It's strange to think I once believed happiness meant corner offices and Manhattan penthouses. And now it means muddy boots and pre-dawn chores," he said with a smile. "And you," she added, "mostly you." His expression grew serious. "I want you to know something. When I saw you get off that bus in Broken Ridge looking lost but determined, I recognized something in you. A strength you maybe didn't even know you had. I needed a wife before winter came, that was true. But what I didn't expect was to find a partner, a best friend, and a love I thought was impossible." Eliza reached up, tracing the scar that marked his face. Once it had seemed intimidating. Now it was simply part of the man she loved. "We saved each other," she said softly. "You from a winter alone, me from a life built on false values." The first stars appeared overhead as twilight deepened around them. From the meadow below, music and laughter drifted up, their friends and neighbors still celebrating their union. "There's something else," Thorne said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "Dr. Mercer called yesterday with my latest test results." Eliza tensed, fear immediately surfacing. The lingering effects of the poisoning had been a constant concern. "The kidney damage is healing better than expected," he continued quickly, seeing her worry. "He says there's no reason we couldn't start a family if that's something you want." Her heart skipped. They had discussed children in abstract terms, something for the future, but never so directly. "A family," she repeated, testing the word. "Little Blackwells running around the ranch?" "Too soon?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. "No," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Not too soon at all. I'd love to have children with you, Thorne." His smile was radiant, a rare, full expression of joy that transformed his features. He pulled her close, his kiss conveying everything words couldn't: gratitude, love, promise. As darkness fell completely, a cool breeze swept across the hillside, carrying the first hint of the evening's chill. Thorne wrapped his arms more securely around Eliza, his body sheltering hers from the wind. "We should head back," he murmured against her hair. "Not yet," she replied, nestling closer. "Just a few more minutes." They stood together on the hillside, silhouetted against the star-filled sky, his larger frame protectively curved around hers. Below them spread the ranch, their home, their future, the life they had built from what had begun as mere survival. Winter had long since passed, but Eliza found herself grateful for the season that had brought them together. A scarred rancher needing a wife before the harsh Montana winter. A city girl who had lost everything. Two practical strangers who had found in each other exactly what they never knew they needed. Love, after all, had turned out to be the most practical arrangement of all.